In this session, we're going to cover attention-based business models, also called, or we can call them also attention merchants. The reason why those are attention merchants is because they sell in, let's say, an advertising marketplace, the repackaged data from users, which is gathered through the platform. So the digital advertising market is pretty much polarized and skewed toward a few key players that control most of it. And these, the main players who control digital marketing market are really Facebook and Google. So we can call this a duopoly. So two companies that control almost the whole market. Now, of course, it's not just like Facebook and Google that control this digital advertising market. There are other companies that you might not know that also play a key role. And companies like Amazon have a huge presence now in the digital advertising space. For a bit of context, in the first nine months of 2021, Amazon most probably passed the $20 billion mark in digital advertising, revenues. And for a bit of context, a company like Twitter probably does in the whole year, in the whole 2021, probably around $3 billion in advertising. So it's almost 10x that, just to give you a little bit of context. So there are other players, other tech giants who entered the industry. Amazon is an example. Apple is another example who is leveraging on the app marketplace to also sell advertising by enabling developers to promote their apps on top of the Apple marketplace, and also that is a multi-billion-dollar business. But let's focus now on the two main attention-based business models, because for Facebook and Google, this is most of where the revenue is coming from. For Facebook, we can say over 99% of the revenues. For Google, probably around 85% of the revenues is coming from digital advertising. And also the two models are slightly different. So we want to understand the differences between the way Facebook runs it and the way Google runs it. So let's start from Google for a simple reason. Google has been the first digital advertising marketplace, a scalable marketplace that has been built in a huge proportion in the web era. So there were like other players before Google, like for instance companies that other search engines that before Google managed to really build a solid digital advertising marketplace, but Google was the company that brought it to a multi-billion-dollar dimension. And the digital advertising, the way Google does it, is pretty interesting, because what happens is that as users perform searches on top of the search engine, the search intent data, so the intent behind the user search gets processed through the Google's algorithm. And in one way, the data is repackaged and is reused in various ways. In one way, the data gets reused to actually improve the user experience. Imagine the case of a user who is performing searches on top of Google, and based on the location of the user, the data is getting repackaged so that it can be shown as local features. This is one example. But then on the other side, as those keywords searches are performed and Google is able to understand what's the intent behind those queries, actually the data which gets repackaged and processed is used in the advertising marketplace and gets sold to advertisers for either a fixed amount based on impressions, which is called CPM, so cost per mille, or based on a clicks, so based on an action of users, so on a cost per click. And based on a keyword and the value of the keyword, and based on the commercial intent or not of the keyword, the price of the keyword can go can be much higher, much lower. For instance, if a user is typing in something like I want car insurance, there is a clear commercial search intent, which is going to be probably worth like $40 or $50 per click if an advertiser wants to bid on top of it and wants to be the first to appear on the Google search engine algorithm. Now, it's very important to notice that within Google, within Alphabet at least, there are many other companies, you have other products. One example is YouTube, that more or less follows the similar logic than Google, but then Google has also other platforms like Google Discover, Google Shopping, Google News, and in all those platforms, while still the logic of the advertising is there, there are slightly different logics based not anymore on just keywords, but on other logics that are evolving right now. Another key mechanism that Google managed to pull out over the years, of course, is AdSense, so the ability to share with publishers the revenue generated through the visibility that publishers get from their users, and so Google will split the revenue with the publisher. And this is pretty much how the attention merchant business model of Google works. Now, let's look at Facebook instead. Now, Facebook, it's pretty interesting because it managed to replicate, even scale further the machine of Google. Now, Google is still larger than Facebook, but if from a legal standpoint, things are not going to change. As you might know, like Facebook went through several scandals in terms of how it managed and handled the data. The Facebook machine has been, so far very, very scalable. So it has been able to grow at a very fast pace, even faster than the Google advertising machine. So over time, if things don't change radically, Facebook is the only digital advertising machine that has the more potential to take over Google in the long run. But how does the Facebook advertising machine works? Now, the whole experience is different. While Google is pretty much, let's say, a sort of pool product where users go and search for something, and based on the search that they performed, they can be served advertising on top of the search engine. On Facebook, the advertising it's shown on the user feed. So what happens is that as the user access and scroll the feed, then the data generated is actually gathered again, either to improve the experience on the platform, or this is repackaged also to be sold as contextual advertising on top of the feed. Another important piece of the puzzle, of course, is that Facebook uses cookies that follow the user along the web, so that as actually the Facebook pixel can be installed, for instance, on an advertiser website, so that the advertiser can sell a contextual ad campaign on top of Facebook when the user is scrolling the feed, so that it can look like the advertising was there on a contextual basis. So the experience should be better than otherwise classical advertising. This is more or less how those two models work. Those are the two main attention merchants that we have as of now, and they managed to build the most scalable platform, digital marketing platforms on the web. It's very important to notice that the web evolved, especially the so-called Web 2.0 evolved by creating apps that managed to create and generate revenues at scale through an advertising-based business model, but things are also evolving and changing in opposite directions now.